Hey guys, how's it going? Today, Erin and I want to walk you through how to plan a new garden or plan for a new garden.
Yeah,
Might
probably
be
more accurate.
better wording. Now, Erin is joining me in this conversation because we're going to be talking a lot about what we've learned in the past 8 years. Moving into this garden, which was much larger than our first, and then we were able to acquire pieces of land through the years and trying to make those all feel like one.
hmm
I would have done such a bad job, and Aaron has done such a good job. And you've got that foresight. Like he can think about the future more than I can. I'm more of like the here and now.
Yeah. Well, you
And
start with the plant.
I do. I start with the plants, and then I like let everything else, like the chips, fall where they may,
Right.
And Aaron's more like, let's not put the cart before the horse. Let's
Sure.
get this worked out so that it's nice for everyone, and that it's practical and that it's easy for when you're doing maintenance. So I've learned a tremendous amount over the past 8 years. So we just wanted to sit with you guys and have a conversation about it. We've broken this up into 6 different points, and now right from the beginning, this is not a garden design course. We're not going to talk through like start to finish how to plant a flower bed. However, we will touch lightly on some different tips along those lines later on. But let me tell you the 6 points we have, loose points.
Yeah.
Number 1 is infrastructure and utilities. Number 2 is accessibility. How does your garden feel to move around? Is it easy? Is it practical? Number 3 is future proofing. I've got my list right here, so don't forget. Future proofing. Is there a hedge you need to plant now so that you can block something in the future? When you start a garden when you're young, you feel like you'll always be young, but
Yeah.
it doesn't work out that way. Are you planning your garden in a way that it's going to be nice for you later in the future? So, and then number 4, we get more into plant things. So how to start with your plants, bone structure plants and plant layering. And then points 5 and 6, we'll be talking about colors and textures of plants.
Yeah.
With just basics though. So let's start with point number 1, which is our infrastructure and utilities. So we're talking water and electric mainly, right?
Yeah. Kind of the not so fun stuff to start with.
0% fun.
And that's why, I kind of want to say that this is probably going to be the most helpful. Hopefully this conversation is kind of like what I wish I would have had, somebody would have told me when we first moved in. But I think this will be mostly helpful for people who have kind of like a blank slate or are rehabbing something. If you already have an established garden, chances are some of that infrastructure is in place or you're prohibited from putting in the infrastructure.
I think a lot of it, though, could be scaled down. I mean, if you're talking like a water line, right? So if you're talking we need to trench and put in a water line so I can have a hose faucet out in this spot. Well, maybe you've moved into a new home that's more of an established garden and it's a lot smaller, but you would like to put some raised beds over here. So you've got a hose faucet on your house. You want to run a water line so that you can set up a drip system. You can scale it down. It doesn't have to be exactly the same project, but it's just getting those things in your mind and thinking about them, I think.
I think one of the things that I sort of wanted to just hammer is that we've been so happy getting conduit lines run for both high voltage. So high voltage will be just a regular outlet. Like if let's say you want to put in a fountain somewhere on your property, like toward the back or just whatever you want, anything that would require power. Maybe you've got like a shed in the corner and you don't have power run to it. Having high voltage conduit run somewhere to where you can have that done is so super nice. So if you're at a point where everything is blank, trust me, just put it in. You don't need to actually run the cable first. You could just put blank conduit. I would recommend,
right?
Yeah, 2-inch if you can. Whoever you hire to put that in, or maybe you'll do it yourself. But if you hire someone, they'll probably laugh at you for putting in 2-inch conduit.
But
they'll be like,
you'll have the last laugh.
yeah, you'll be like,
sure.
what? They'll be like, what in the world are you ever going to use 2-inch conduit for? But you know what? It's not that much more expensive, and it's so nice to have big conduit to where you don't have too many things running through it. And I would even recommend 2-inch conduits. The second, so high voltage. And run those wherever on your property that you think in the future I might need power run to. And you can just run them to a little, they're called like a J box, a junction box. You can have a little circle that just, little circle, like irrigation type.
It's like an access point.
Yeah,
where
it's
you
an
can
access
take the
point.
lid off and see
And you
it.
don't have to run it to the exact location. You're just running it to like a convenient point that you could jump off from later, like as close as possible. And then running the low voltage conduit as well, which will be like your sprinkler wire if you need to run a new zone later. Or Ethernet lines. If you are, again, if let's say you want to put like a shed on the back corner of your property at one point, or like a little greenhouse, something like that, and you like to spend time out there and you want to put like a little router so you have internet out there, whatever, those kinds of things, you can run Ethernet through those types of lines. So you probably want to make sure that those types of conduits are run from, from your, what are they called? Your electrical panel on the side of your home. And just get them done. Like if you're going to be putting in your sprinkler system, like now's the time. You're trenching everything up. Do it, like trust me, do it now, because you're going to get to the point where if you want to do it in the future, you're like, I don't want to tear up the grass to get this in.
It makes it different.
Or tear up, like maybe you put in like a pathway and you'd have to go underneath the pathway, or you put in a deck and now you have to somehow get underneath the deck. So when things are blank, that's the time to put in empty conduit, places that you think in the future you may need it.
Because when you have to trench up existing grass, the grass never seeds right. It seeds differently.
Right.
Like it's different. Like the grass, like you put the same seed in, but the soil's now different because it's all like loose and fluffy, and it looks different than your existing grass. It takes a long time to get them to blend again.
Yeah. It's just like an unfun thing to spend money on in the beginning, but you'll thank yourself later for running conduit.
Well, case in point, when we were able to buy I don't remember how many acres, 3 right in front of our house, 3-ish acres. We had to spend a lot of time putting in trenches all the way around that property, and it prohibited us from going forward with any projects.
Yeah.
Like we had to wait a long time because it takes, we had to have somebody come in and do all of that. And so we were waiting on them, and we had this huge trench open for a long time. It's not a fun part of the process.
No, it's kind of a huge bummer, but trust me.
Yeah.
Like do it now. Do some of those things that are sort of unfun.
Right. Plan for, if you are in an area where you have cold winters, plan for frost-free water if you can. If you're going to trench water anyway, figure out where, you need to have your frost-free line. We have to go down 4 feet here, right? 48 inches. So we go down 4 feet, and then you have water access through the winter. And there are some areas where we knew we wouldn't need it. And so we didn't do those. We just run them off of like regular sprinkler line kind of depth. But there are lots of different areas where we have frost-free lines now, because while you're at it, you may as well go down the depth you need to have the frost-free water, the capability to use water everywhere.
Well, imagine, if you've planted your garden or done whatever it is you're going to do, and then later you decide that you want frost-free water toward the back of your property, which is where a lot of times people have like barns and sheds and greenhouses. Like a lot of times they're not right next to the house. They'll place them away for whatever reason, or maybe they're already there. You're really limiting what you can do in the future. Of course, you can if you've got money, you can tear anything up, but you'll save so much money if you just do it in the beginning.
Right.
As opposed to waiting until everything's kind of planted, and then you've got tree roots in the way, and you've got, all your perennials and shrubs are in the way, and again, pathways or whatever.
And let me tell you what, putting in more faucets than you think you need, it's kind of like putting in more outlets than you think you need. You will thank yourself later. There are a couple of spots in our garden where we have faucets, but they're under the ground. So they have them in a box, like a landscape irrigation box, and they're on an arm. So you can open the lid, and then you just flip the water faucet up, you can hook your hose on, and you've got water right there. So even if you don't want an above ground faucet, having that, I didn't even know that was a thing you could do.
Right.
How awesome is that? That's not a frost-free thing, but it's something you can use.
It has to be turned off in the fall.
Right, but it's usually like they're in weird areas, and it's places where you don't want visible water faucets, but they don't have to be.
Yeah. Well, I see that with a lot of people that are putting in landscapes for the very first time. Like they don't even really know what to ask their landscaper to do to future-proof. And you really should be saying, what if I wanted to have a couple more sprinkler zones or drip zones or something, farther away from the house? How would I do that in the future? A lot of times sprinkler guys will just put in the bare minimum. They'll just put in exactly what you need for today, and there's no way to add on to it later. So you really should put some live water. If you're going to the work of putting in sprinklers, you should put some live water in places where you might, and then also the sprinkler lines. So either run the low voltage conduit so that you can put a sprinkler line through it later, or just run the sprinkler line now. But get those sprinkler lines to I shouldn't call sprinkler lines, the sprinkler wire. So that you can have a zone somewhere else on your property. Because you might decide that you want raised beds toward the back corner. And if you
Right.
want that to be automatic, if you didn't run that sprinkler wire, then you've got to basically have like a timer over there, or it's just not as convenient. But if you can tie it all into the same system, you'll be really happy.
Yeah. So I think, really sitting down and getting real with yourself about how far you want to haul water, or how, I don't know, how many Christmas lights you want to put out, or water systems. If you are, or I mean, water fountains, if you're in planning mode, really be honest with yourself about where you want things and plan for it.
Yeah.
I am currently trying to talk my mom into, and she wants to do this, but their closest water, frost-free water to her potting shed, which she uses all the time, has seeds starting out there. She's got houseplants out there. It's all the way by their pool, which you have to trek through their raised bed garden, through their lawn, through another flower bed to get to that hose. And then you have to haul can after can after can of water. And I asked her, Mom, what do you need to do to get frost-free water out there? You need to do that. That will save you so much time and headache.
Yeah.
All they have to do is pop up under the fence into their driveway, trench down their driveway to the potting shed.
Yeah, except for their driveway has been trenched multiple times now. What they should have done when they ran new power, they should have gone 4 feet down.
Sure.
Did it at that point.
That's a thing that if they would have thought about that, but it was the last thing on their mind. But that's the thing. That's why we wanted to tell you, like, don't let it be the last thing on your mind. Really think through those things, especially if you are in the process of tearing things up and starting fresh anyway. She can still do it. They'll just have to get all their lines located, and they'll have to hand dig in a few just one area, I think.
Sure. That's the point, is that it's always more complicated. You're going to run into things you didn't intend to because you didn't do it in the beginning. And it is a huge pain in the butt. You can make it sound like, oh, we just need to do this. We just need to hand dig this little bit. But I guarantee you'll break something. You'll break stuff. It'll cost more.
Oh, we've broken so many things just trying to. So that's just something we've learned. If you can do it from the very beginning and not avoid those headaches later on.
You'll save a ton of money.
You will, and it will be so much more pleasant.
Right.
So I've got in this point, I'm just going to run through these really quick just in case we forgot anything, but we talked through frost-free water lines, putting those as many places as you can. Regular water lines, again, as many places as you can, and even the hidden ones. High voltage power conduit you talked about, low voltage conduit like sprinkler wire, Ethernet cables for Wi-Fi or cameras. That's pretty much it for that point. So we'll move on to point number 2, which is accessibility.
Yeah.
Now this is something that many of you know what my parents' garden looks like. That's the garden I grew up in and I learned a lot in that garden space, and I love it. It's terraced and it's beautiful. It's not super accessible, and it's not my parents' fault that it's not accessible, because when we moved in, the terracing was already there. In order to make it more accessible and like wider pathways to get things through, they would have had to tear things up from the gate. And that's a really hard thing to do when things are already set up.
Yeah.
So if you are at the beginning stages of setting things up, make sure that you have accessibility. Like for us, we've got so much going on. We have to make sure gators can go.
Yeah.
And I don't know how wide a gator is. 5 feet? 6 feet maybe? Ish? 5 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have to make sure pathways are at least that wide. However, we've done wider pathways, which I've been thankful for. Like the grass pathways out, the main ones out in the South Garden are 15 feet. We can run 2 gators, like traffic.
Sure.
We can have traffic out there and we have enough space. Now, my mom calls those boulevards. She doesn't want boulevards through her whole garden, and neither do I, but I want boulevards in order to get everywhere. And then you can spider off the boulevards with smaller, more intimate pathways. But even then, you'd still want to make sure you can get your wheelbarrow or your garden cart or your pop-up bag or whatever you need to do to maintain your plants. You want to make sure that things are wide enough. So you have to take into account that this is something that Aaron's kind of like, you remind me of this constantly. Okay, so we're putting in a pathway. Well, he's like, Laura, make sure it's at least wide enough to accommodate for a foot of plant material crawling over the walkway, because if you put in a 3-foot walkway, I know you're going to plant lavender on either side or something like that, and it's going to spill over, and then you'll have a 1.5 feet to walk.
Right.
Which is true. And I didn't really think about that. So you have to plan for, like when we put in the front brick walkway, it's 5 feet wide, and it seems enormous because it is, until you have plants there to kind of soften the edges and crawl over the edges. But it's just making sure the accessibility is there, because especially as you add more garden areas, or I don't know, I feel like as you get older and things get a little bit harder to do and you're a little bit slower at doing them, if they're easy to at least access, you're going to thank yourself so much in the future for that.
Right.
So we have got, and on our specific property, we've got like pathways that are large enough for trucks to access. We've got pathways for gators, and then we've got walking pathways. We've got all of those kinds of
Yeah,
things.
and just make sure that your walking pathways, again, are large enough, depending on how you want it to look. Of course, just try to be as intentional as possible about how wide areas are. Because if you need to get like a gorilla cart, through your pathway, if it's too tight and you can't do that, you're probably not going to want to spend as much time in your space if you feel like you can't clean it properly, or if it's too much work to do. But if you make it in a way that's kind of a little more effortless to clean, then you'll spend more time out there.
That is so true. And that's kind of one of the reasons, like even in here in the Hartley, I mean, there's a lot of plant material in here, but there isn't like, it's not so jammed that you can't move around.
Yeah.
And it would be really easy to really pack this greenhouse out with stuff. But if it's not easy to move around, you just don't want to move around in it as much because it's a kind of a pain.
Yeah.
And I don't know accessibility, if there's anything else in that realm. I guess you could kind of talk about infrastructure and accessibility in the same kind of token, because you want all of your hoses to be accessible.
Right.
If you're going to do hose reels, you have to make sure, because hose reels largely need to be pulled out straight. Do you have enough room?
Yeah.
There are some things, some guides. Like there's guides you can stick in the ground. There's also like corner guides you can put on the corner of a building. You can slip your hose through it and it will help facilitate like the dragging of the hose reel out. But largely, like in our garden space, we just walk with the hose and pull it out of the reel, but you have to have a straight pathway to do that. So you just want everything that you're planning for to be easy to get to.
Yeah.
And there's some spots, like right now, we've got a couple of hoses that need some stepping stones put in front of them because they're muddy in front of them. And I've kind of lumped that into accessibility. Is it accessible? Not really, not unless you want to just get your shoes loaded down with mud.
Sure.
It just makes it a little bit harder that way. There's a lot of different things like that in the garden you could probably think about. But I'm thinking too, like about our pond area. There are some spaces where you want it to be intimate and you want the pathways to feel, my mom called them what, sneakity sneak pathways, just very like quaint and cozy. And I want that feel in our garden still. And we'll get there eventually once our stuff has maturity, but there will always be those little spots like around the pond. I don't want a boulevard going through the pond. I don't want really wide gate or wide pathways. I want it to feel more intimate. But the thing about it is that that's not a super huge area. We can still access it from all the way around with our gator. And then the pathways are still just wide enough to get our pop-up bags in there. So it's still accessible enough to...
It's like you need a boulevard to access both sides of the sneakity snake.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right.
Because it's like if you go too far and there's just no access on the back side of it, then it's kind of like, well, you might take care of the front side of it, but you're just really never getting that far in.
And if it's a pain to load your, like you have to haul your stuff a great distance to get it to somewhere, your compost pile, or get it to your gator or your wheelbarrow or whatever. I mean, what a pain. It just makes it harder. So if you can make it accessible, do try to do that and just think about it. That's the thing. Think about the infrastructure. Think about the accessibility. The third thing is to think about future proofing, which in that category, it's mostly about like we planted our arborvitae hedge.
Right.
When we planted it, was there one house?
Yeah, one house.
There was one house. We knew when we bought this property that there was going to be a subdivision one day. And there was no houses at that time. And then the first one was built, and then we put in the arb hedge, which they were tiny.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't like whips. They were tiny. I don't know, 3 feet tall, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. And that now they're huge.
Yeah, 10 feet or 12 feet
They
tall.
still have a little bit of growing to do, but we are so thankful we planted that because now there are 3 homes back there. And you do see the roof line. That's just a kind of a fact of life, unless you're going to do a really deep border and have room to do very big things, which that would be great as well. But that has been such a huge boon to that side of the garden space, I feel.
Yeah.
And had we not done that earlier on in the game, we would still be looking at them and we'd have a clear view into the windows of their homes.
Right.
I don't really want that. I want to look at a green backdrop. Although we like all of our neighbors,
Sure.
Green backdrop is very pleasant.
Yeah, absolutely. And just getting those things done first, I mean, I would put that pretty high on the list of what order should we do things or how are we going to design the garden? Well, part of it you can almost set aside and say, well, what do we need to block first? Because that's going to dictate a lot of the other things we do. You shouldn't design a space without factoring in what needs to be blocked first. So, and you can start with any size. You can start with whips. You know, you can go if your budget isn't huge, but I would do it. I'd get them planted and get them started
Yeah.
because,
Because the best kind of tree is the one planted
20 years
20
ago
years
or
ago.
whatever it is.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, there are some things like the red point maples, for example, on the west side of our garden. How long have they been in? 7 years? 6
Yeah.
years maybe?
Yeah.
They're huge now.
Right.
And they're casting shade almost to the point where I'm going to be able to change that into a shade garden here in the next couple of years probably. But when you plant them, and we started with kind of larger trees, I mean, 4 ones you can buy. But it's amazing how fast they actually put on growth because time goes by so fast.
Yeah.
And you're like, man, where did that 5 years go? Or the 7 years. I mean, Benjamin's 7 now. Where did that 7 years go? I'm so glad we planted everything that year that we did because it's all put on a lot of size and it's looking more mature. So yeah, start with any size you want to or can and get those things blocked.
Yeah, and along with blocking views, but also just where are we going to want shade in the future and where are we going to want sun in the future? Because there may be some trees you need to take out, and you know you probably want to get that done sooner rather than later because if you plant your garden like taking trees out,
Oh, sure.
you know that kind of goes along with accessibility. It's like, well, if things are a little more bare, there's probably going to be a little bit of destruction that happens. Whoever comes and takes it out. So I would get that stuff done as soon as you can. And then planting trees for wherever you do want shade in the future. Again, there's no time like the present. You know, get those things started because they're going to take a while, but you'll be really happy in 5 to 10 years that you got on it.
Yeah.
And you didn't go to the garden center and buy your annuals the first year or, you know, buy a bunch of perennials
It's
and plant
easy to
those
do.
instead.
That's so easy to do
Yeah,
because
because they're so colorful.
they're high
and,
impact.
Yeah, they make a big impact, but it's like, well, we waited on the trees for a couple of years because we didn't have the budget. So we planted perennials instead. Well, have fun looking at your fence.
Right.
You know?
Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later on too, like what plants to start with. But yeah, so you want to just really assess the borders of your space or even things within your space. We want to create a backdrop behind the pond because I don't want to be looking through to the high tunnels, or the red barn. I want those things. They're not bad looking, but I would like to have a backdrop to that pond area so it looks like it's natural and it fits into that space instead of seeing things. Also creating those cozy rooms. So, you're not only hedging to block stuff, but you're also creating so much structure in your garden space, especially with evergreens. If I was to recommend anything to start with first, evergreens, because evergreens take longer than deciduous and evergreens block things all 4 seasons of the year. So, once you have it there, it's there, and I feel like that's a really smart thing to do. But also in the future proofing category, it's planning for your future self. And I feel like a lot of that goes hand in hand with accessibility, making sure it's accessible, easy to get to. There's not an enormous amount of stairs if you can help it. Like having a gradual incline instead of a bunch of stairs is just better. But also I'm thinking about raised beds, right? So we are thinking about moving our raised bed garden. We're not going to this year. I'm not prepared mentally to do that yet because I love that space. But I think about those raised beds and how they're still easy to work in, but I can see how going forward I will want things that are higher.
Sure.
When you move into a new space, and I feel like this is how it was with my parents too, because they were in their 20s when we moved into the place out in the country, like maybe their mid to late 20s. And so when you're that age, you feel like you're going to always be that age, or you feel like things are just going to always feel the same.
Yeah.
Like you're going to always be spry and you're going to always have the strength. Well, I can even see in the last 5 years, my hand strength isn't quite like it used to be, right? And so things like that start to kind of, you think about it. And I think, well, it might be kind of nice to have some waist high raised beds out here so I don't have to be on my knees. I don't have any knee problems at this point. But I can think about how nice it would be. I mean, this year we've, removed our row of strawberries out in the cut flower garden. And what a pain to harvest strawberries that are right on the ground because the plant's this tall, and the strawberries are right down there and you're all hunched over, you're on your knees. I want not even a waist high, I want counter height.
Right.
I want a tall raised bed so I don't even have to bend over at all to harvest those or tend to those berries. We love them so much that I think it's worth it to put in something like that, especially for more of a plant that's going to stay around, Anyway, so think about those things. How are you going to think about this or feel about this in the future? it might be kind of nice to have things be a little bit easier or a little bit more convenient. Because if it's accessible and convenient, you'll want to work in it. You know, if it's hard and it hurts, it's going to be a pain and it's going to be a chore, and we don't want it to be a chore. And I don't know, this doesn't really fit into any category, but you know, people are always trying to, in the ease factor, like weeds and future-proofing against weeds. I don't think there's any way to future-proof 100%. And we don't use landscape fabric, like as a rule, kind of in any areas except for a couple. And I feel like this has been really good for us. We used landscape fabric in our raised bed garden in the walkways. And I feel like that was so great.
Yeah.
Because it makes the space so nice. We don't have to spray herbicides in there near our food crops. We don't have to spend hours trying to pick weeds from between gravel, which is also great because that's hard to do. Have you tried to weed in gravel?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
It's a pain in the butt.
it's the worst.
Trying to get spurge out of gravel.
Yeah, spurge is a bad one in gravel. Oh.
So basically, you would recommend putting weed fabric anywhere that's a pathway.
Pathways, yeah, if you can.
Right.
In fact, did they do it here or here?
I don't know.
I can't remember. I think maybe around the bricks. Underneath some of our walkways, we do have a layer of landscape fabric before they put like the gravel layer down. And it's been so nice. So nice. So I am a believer in landscape fabric insofar as in walkways that you're not going to be planting in. So it's not really like detrimental because it's not.
It's like okay to be detrimental to the soil
Soil
in those
health
areas.
in that spot because you don't want it to be healthy. You don't want weeds to grow in it. The other couple of spots we have used landscape fabric is in the greenhouse. Thankful for that.
Again, it's basically a walkway.
Yeah. And in the high tunnel area.
Yeah.
The only 2 flower beds where there are plants where we have used it is underneath the arb hedge on the west side because we had bindweed in there. And I knew if we did not put landscape fabric down, we would have bindweed until the end of time because once it grows up into your plants, and if you have bindweed, you know what I'm talking about, but you can't spray it out of an arb hedge or boxwood hedge. We have a little bit of fabric in the Persephone garden underneath our boxwood hedge because of the same issue. Once the bindweed takes hold, you can kind of pull the leaves or not branches. They're vines. You can pull the vines out, but you're not going to ever take care of the roots of it. And you can't spray it because then you'll kill your hedge. So putting landscape fabric down in those couple of spots has eliminated a lot of headache. And a huge problem we'd have. Yeah. And I would hate it. I would hate that spot. You know, you don't want that. You want to love your spaces. So anyway, I feel like those make it a little bit more, I guess, future-proof in a way. Okay, so the last 3 points are more like plant-centered. The first one is about layering, and we already kind of touched on this a little bit, but if I were to start, or when I do start most you can't even say that because I kind of am willy-nilly all over the place, but I always have it in my mind where I want evergreens and deciduous trees. Always start with your big bone structure stuff first because that will dictate everything else in your space. So start with those things, get those planted first if you can. Now we have we're featuring plants from companies and stuff like that I get my hands on this perennial that I need to plant over in a full sun spot that we have just barely started, so I don't quite have all of my layers in place, but I leave space for those. So evergreens and deciduous trees first, and then you do your large shrubs or small trees at that point. And then you work down to smaller shrubs, maybe some ornamental grasses in that same kind of category. And then you work your way down to perennials, and then your bulbs, and then your annuals. So that is kind of the layering. Now, there are a lot of different exceptions to the rule, and that's why I really kind of hate talking about garden design because it's so personal and you need to like your space, so do it the way you like it. There are some people who like to put tall things in the front of borders. I can't get behind that. I can't. I just have a hard time with that. I'm such a creature of I like a little bit of order. And I don't mind it if things are a little bit uneven, a little bit back, but right up to the grass, I need to have something low. So it's like a gradual welcome to the flower bed. Sure. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, and so it's sort of like stadium seating at a theater.
So you can see everything.
You can see everything,
Yeah, which I think you need to break that up a little bit.
Sure.
Otherwise it's going to look too, everything's going to have that look to it. But that's generally how I would approach landscape design when I worked down at the garden center. I had to do that a lot. So I would always, when I was thinking about their spaces, I would think about, okay, windows and views, make sure that they're not blocked. Put your evergreens and your deciduous trees. Where do you want shade? What do you want to block? That kind of thing. And then I would work down from there.
Which is why I know you've been a huge proponent of larger, deeper flower beds.
Yes.
Because a lot of times landscapers will come in with, these prefab houses and they'll do a 2-foot.
with concrete border. That's
Yeah.
my nightmare. That is my nightmare. Like 6 feet at the minimum when
Yeah.
you're putting in a flower bed, at the minimum. Because if you do a 2-foot flower bed, you are not going to be able to create the balance for your house.
Right.
You will not be able to weight the corners of your house, and things will always look a little bit off. If you can at least have 6 feet, there are some options. I would say deeper than that if you can. But at least 6 feet, you can get some skinny trees, or some skinny evergreens that will create the height and kind of create that visual weight that the home needs in order to look connected to the land. Otherwise, you're still going to look perched and like it's not quite, it just doesn't quite work. So yeah, we always told people when they were in the midst of home building, like if you can have the landscapers put in a minimum of 6 to 8 feet, then your choices are going to be so much bigger.
Yeah.
So that's a very good point. Yeah, create deep borders. The deeper, the better.
And a lot of the planning aspect, I mean, I feel like it can be so subjective and personal that at a certain point you just need to get on like Google image search or look through magazines or books
Inspiration.
or Pinterest or whatever and just find the things that speak to you. Because, if you want a 2-foot border, put in a 2-foot border. But you just need to find the thing that looks the best to you, like what style is your style, and then just start copying some of the things, the elements that you like the most.
You can take bits and pieces from things like, oh, I know that picture of that house. I'd probably be able to find it really fast if I Google search, but there's like a walkway leading up to it that's got hostas. They're like Patriot hostas. They're white and green and it's striking and gorgeous. Well, somebody who likes that likes the continuous feel. They like that it draws your eye all the way to the end of it. Also, it's a mature garden, so there's like mature trees and shade and things, and that's always attractive. But yeah, you can pick things out that you like and don't be afraid to just copy it.
Yeah.
If you like that element and it really speaks to you, try to find a spot in your garden to do that. That's the best way. Sure. And don't be afraid to move stuff around a little bit too.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to even say that because if you're planning, even when you plan, like with all the knowledge that you possess, you might need to move something a little bit. There was a Scarlet Curls willow in our last garden that we moved twice.
Sure.
Do you remember that? One time it needed to be moved like 6 inches. 6 inches it needed to be scooted over. If you could figure that out like at ASAP after you plant it, it's easier because it hasn't rooted in yet. But don't be afraid to move things around and don't be afraid to take stuff out either. If you plant something and you're like, I just don't like this, like it was beautiful in the picture because a lot of plants are beautiful for a short amount of time and then they look scraggly. Rosa Sharons are one of those for me. I'm like, they're okay. I got them in our garden because they do provide some color in the dog days of summer. And I do like that about them, but I don't like their growth habit. I don't like the way their leaves look. They look like a messy kind of plant to me. And so you might plant something that you think is just going to be this amazing plant, and then it's just not. Don't feel bad about it. You can find a new home for it. There's a lot of people, I can find homes for our plants in a second. Like, hey, I'll send a text out or whatever. I've got this flower bed and I don't want this, and this in there. If anybody wants to come get it, you can come get it at your leisure. Dig it when you're ready. But yeah, I think curating your space and getting rid of the things you don't end up liking, there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Sure.
And I feel like there's a lot of fear around that. Like if I put it in, that's it.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't have to be,
You're never stuck.
Right. Okay, so the last 2 points, number 5 and 6, kind of go hand in hand. It's just colors and textures in the garden and really thinking about varying that because then you can really, one plant will set another one off beautifully. My mom always taught me when I was doing landscape design to try to incorporate the 4 colors, red, blue, green, and yellow. Even if it's the tiniest hint of yellow or the tiniest hint of red in a leaf color, maybe even not a bloom color. That way you will have some kind of cohesion and it really does work. Of course, there are always exceptions to that too. Like if somebody wants to create a moon garden and they want to do all shades of green foliage and all white flowers, that's gorgeous. And I love that look. So it depends on what style you're going with. But in general, when you're just creating kind of a normal landscape, those are the 4 colors. So again, red, blue, green, and yellow. And blue might be a blue evergreen. It might be a blue shade in a grass or a leaf color. I try not to base it off of blooms because blooms can be fleeting. Yellow, a little yellow stripe in a grass, in a leaf of a grass. Green's easy to come by. Red foliage, so you can pop a coleus in there. Ridiculous coleus, boom, like beautiful color. It's not a perennial, but beautiful color. You can pop in a sand cherry or a 9-bark or something like that in a spot and get that red color. So just really be thinking about those four colors and how you can incorporate those in your space, and somehow it makes it just look so pleasing and pleasant. I don't know where my mom learned that.
It's true though, when you see something that kind of has a little bit of all of those colors, there's something about it that just kind of feels right.
Yeah.
And it's hard to put your finger on it.
Yeah.
But then I think if somebody tells you, they're like, oh, it's because it has all 4 colors. You're like, oh, yeah.
It does.
It looks full and correct somehow.
Right.
And you don't, like you said, you don't have to have a lot of
Right.
all of those colors.
People shy away from yellow a lot, I
Yeah.
find, because they feel like yellow is the sign of something being sick, which it can't be.
Not wrong.
But there are beautiful, like lemony lace elderberry. Oh, such a bright, beautiful spot in the garden. So, so beautiful. It might be a stem color, Arctic Fire yellow dogwoods, yellow twig dogwood. Love that, especially for a winter landscape, but you see that yellow popping through even in the summertime. So just look for like just the subtlety of the color in something. And same goes for textures. You know, I like to have a grassy texture with an evergreen texture, with a bold leaf texture, with something more fine. When you plant too much of one thing together, it can look messy, and you don't distinguish one plant from another necessarily. So if you you don't have to plant in big blocks like I do. I plant in like large drifts a lot because we've got a large space, and I don't like smaller scale cottage gardens where you can plant like a foxglove and then a Veronica. Yeah. And then an echinacea, and then like really vary it and make it look like a little bit of a jumble. There's a charm to that I love. But when you're doing a big scale garden, you will lose your plants so fast if you don't have at least a few of them together because it's got to fit the scale of your space. But making sure that textures vary as well will help other plants set off. And that's why I really like to use ornamental grasses a lot too, is because you can put one of those in, and they're usually, you can pick ones that are very thin, and they'll just produce like this really, I don't know, beautiful effect. And then whatever is in front of it, all of a sudden it shines and it pops. It's interesting how that works out. And in all of that too, you want to be thinking about some hardscape items. I don't think we even made a category for that.
Sure.
But it's hardscape. Fountains, pots, boulders, statuary, things like that. Now this one's completely personal, just like the garden design portion is, but something I've learned through the years is not to overdo it. If you overdo it, you kind of lose the allure, I feel like. You kind of lose the specialness or uniqueness of the pieces that you choose if there's too much going on.
It can look cluttered.
It can look cluttered, that's right. And I feel like we've got quite a number of large statues kind of in this same vicinity around the front of the Hartley area. We've got a large angel statue and then a Hebe statue. They're on the opposite ends of the lawn though. They're not right next to each other. They don't even share a flower bed. And we are going to be planting a lot of stuff in between the two of those things. There's going to be tree canopies blocking them from one another eventually. So, you know, while right now you can see each one of those, if you're standing at either one of them, eventually you will not be able to. And I love a garden space where it highlights that piece, if it's like the piece for that space. Unless, you know, there's other things. There's like, you know, the brick containers we have around concrete containers around our brick patio. That's part of a design.
Sure.
And so it makes sense, just like having the 4 seasons statues. It makes sense to have all 4 of those together, but when you have a little bit of this and that, and pots and garden stakes and gazing balls and all kinds of stuff, they all have their own beauty and charm. But for me, like being controlled with that, try to control yourself, I feel like it gives more oomph to the garden.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't lose one while looking at the other. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain that. One more thing before we wrap up, because I think we're about done. When you're thinking about your colors and your textures, also be thinking about what those look like in the winter. That's a huge game changer.
Sure.
Winter interest is such a huge game changer in areas where we are cold for months out of the year, which we are for at least 5 months out of the year. We've got we still have snow floor right now outside. It's starting to go away, but it's still there. And when we have winter interest and pretty things to look at in the wintertime, like be thinking about that. Like your Arctic Fire yellow twig dogwood, that allows you to see yellow in your space in the summertime. It provides some blooms and a nice, you know, foliar accent, but it also provides a tremendous amount of winter interest. So if you can get a twofer out of them, or as many seasons of interest out of your plants as possible, then you're gonna like your space so much more. And we've been really working on that. I really think about winter interest all throughout the summers. And I feel like this last year we were able to really go after that. And your hardscape can be considered your winter interest as well. I mean, we don't wrap any of our statues or pots. We like the way they look in the winter landscape as well. But yeah, just be thinking about those things, colors, textures, what they look like in the wintertime, how you're layering them. Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like I think that's all I've got I've got to share and in terms of how to kind of think about your space. But if you can do it in a certain order and control yourself from like, buying your annuals the first year. And so I get it though. Like if you need annuals that first year in containers so that it fills that need, do it. But if you can also be focusing on, starting up your evergreen hedge and getting that going, it's the less glamorous part of the job for sure, but you'll thank yourself so much. So much when you're not having to, tread through perennials because you planted those first in order to get your hedge put behind them,
Right.
or like this is a classic for me, but planting bulbs where, I shouldn't be planting bulbs.
Right.
I don't know. I put the cart before the horse as well often, especially when we're getting things like we're getting big bulb orders and things. And yeah, so I've popped a lot of bulbs in places where I've then had to plant other things because I didn't have anything in that space yet. And I've wished, like, dang, I should just focus on areas that I have done with these bulbs so that I'm not wasting the bulbs and break, the auger tearing them apart and stuff.
Well, and I think that there's a fair number of people, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I feel like there's a fair number of people that just peter out and they give up with gardening because they've done things in the wrong order. Like they get to July or August and they planted their garden, but they didn't put the irrigation in. It's like they could have, but they just decided, oh, I'll just water it by hand. And then they kind of just give up because it's hot and they don't want to go out there and water every day by hand.
Right.
And so, it's a huge part of gardening, and getting some of those infrastructure things in, or the things that make it easier, will get you through the whole season, as opposed to just kind of like, I'm sick of it. I don't want to keep going out there.
Yeah. Just being organized about it as much as you can, it's really helpful. And we've spent the last 8 years trying to hone the process, and we still will spend the next,
30 years.
30 years honing the process. Like we've been doing some big organizing projects in the barn, and even making like parts and things like that more handy and accessible to get to, because it makes the job more pleasant. But I think it's worth it to put the effort into that for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Anyway, we thought it might be helpful to sit and talk through some of those things, because we sure wish with a lot of our projects that we had somebody say, have you thought about this?
Right.
Have you thought, do you want electric out here? You'd like to do Christmas lights. You better better make sure you got something out there. We really wish in the beginning, especially, that we would have had somebody guiding us there.
I think one thing that I would have changed with this property, if I could go back, is we would have made deeper borders for blocking out neighbors.
Yeah.
And we would have focused more on that. It's hindsight, but you get excited. You want to put in the vegetable garden, and I think we kind of succumbed to that, to like the excitement of like, we'll just put it right here. And there isn't a house there now, but we knew there was gonna be one.
Yeah.
And I think if we maybe had some a little more restraint, then we probably would have put in some more evergreens that got taller and wider, and maybe some deciduous trees.
Yeah.
Staggered things a little bit to where it's not all the same.
Right.
But yeah, I think we probably would have done that if we could go back.
Yeah, I think I don't have really any regrets, and that's not even like a super huge regret, but that would probably be the one thing. You're right, that we could have changed. I think at the time, it was closer to the kitchen, and we wanted the food crops closer. We had nothing over there because we had to get rid of the willows and the elm trees over there, and we could have put a raised bed garden back in the north garden where the pond now is, because it was a full sun area. But it was established and it was done. I mean, we ripped it out and done something different there. But had I been able to think past some of those things, but I just didn't.
Right.
So let this be an encouragement to you.
Well, you're never going to hit the nail on the head. You're never going to be like, oh, I know exactly how I'm going to want to use this in the future, But I think we could have done a little bit better in that area. I feel like one area that we've nailed is infrastructure with conduit in the ground.
That'd be you've nailed. I had nothing. I will say that I have pretty much no part of that. I mean, I think about it now.
I feel like
I'm so thankful for it.
We've used almost every every bit of conduit that we've put in the ground, because we just put in blank conduit, there's nothing in it, and then later on, because running a wire through it is
Or
easy.
an extension cord twice now.
Yeah.
We've run an extension cord for Christmas lights
Yeah.
through conduit.
But just do it like deciding, okay, well, we're going to be trenching through this area. Let's trench 4 feet down, put in our frost-free line at 4 feet, because we're already tearing it up. Let's just do everything. Let's get the frost-free in there. We'll backfill it 2 feet. We'll run our electrical and we'll run whatever other water and
Conduit.
everything else.
Yeah.
And that way you're only tearing up your space once as opposed to tearing it up multiple times.
Can you run water and electrical in the same trench?
Yeah, you can, as long as they have enough separation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Just double checking on that. Anyway, guys, that is it for today's video. We just wanted to sit and visit through some of these things and talk about what we wished we would have known going into a lot of these projects. And if you have any other suggestions or things to think about, we'd love to hear about them in the comment section down below, because I know we all have our own individual experiences and different things. We're dealing with different things in different parts of the country too. Like a lot of you might have to think about French drains. Like, where do we need drainage? You know,
right.
Where we don't have to think about that. So there's a lot of things that you would probably be able to be helpful to other people. And we'll discuss some of those in our weekly highlights recap video on our highlights channel. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was helpful, and we will see you in the next one. Bye.